Program Director, Dr. Nduna, thank you very much. Minister, greetings, DM, the CEO of the HSRC, board members, and other CEOs. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for gracing this occasion this morning. My task is very simple. The Minister doesn't want us to recite a long, protracted biography. It suffices to say that the Minister remains an outsourced academic, an outsourced sociologist. So he's been in government for some time, and he remains the Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, and it is my great pleasure, therefore, to invite the Minister to talk to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DG. Let me greet the program director, Dr. Nduna, our deputy minister. Let me not call you doctor. You know why, I also want to advise you. I'm not saying Sarah was wrong, but I've just had good news that you defended your PhD successfully a few days ago. But we'll only call you doctor once we have graduated. That's the tradition of academia. But well done, DM. Let me greet honorable members of parliament who are here. That's where I have to start. I don't know if our portfolio committee chair is here. I don't see her. We have to do that in politics, otherwise we're in trouble. You go to parliament, they give you such a tough time. Let me greet our DG, Dr. Cele. I don't see the chair, Dr. Lubisi, here, of the HSRC. Let me also greet the CEO, Professor Sarah Mswetsa. You know, CEO, you thought you have got difficulties with this word, epistemic. I want to complicate your life now. My speech writer, he likes to play with words. That's what he's paid for. And she says, well, we must extend now your very important notion of epistemic to also include epistemicide, which actually captures what is happening in Gaza now. The Israeli soldiers have completely destroyed the education system in Gaza. With more than 100 professors killed in a population of 2 million. Where will they get those professors? How long will it take them to do that? So if epistemic you thought is difficult, then my speechwriter said, talk also about epistemicide. Actually, the genocide against not just people, but their education system. Let me greet Dr. Nelwa Mondo, the CEO of the National Research Foundation. Let me also respectfully greet our Chief Electoral Officer, Ubabu Saima Mabulo. At least Professor Masetsa had warned me that you are possibly going to be here, because when I see you, I always get worried. I know elections are around the corner. And it's going to be a lot of hard work. Let's greet also our colleagues from the rest of our continent who are here. Senior government officials, including the DDGs that are here from my department, heads of public research institutions, head of academic institutions, leaders of business, established and young researchers and scientists, distinguished guests. I'm glad, Dr. Nduna, that when you recognized those from the rest of our continent, you also recognized my dear friend there, Dr. Ibo Mandaza. We come a long way, by the way. Those who do not know, we first met in 1986 in Harare when he founded his Southern Africa Political Economy series. I'm deeply honored by the invitation to come and address this prestigious gathering, the HSRC NRF Engaged Research Conference. I'm also pleased by the fact that your chosen theme, which is engage research as a pathway to bridging knowledge and society, resonates with our own departmental mantra, very much so. That of placing science, technology, and innovation at the center of government, education, industry, and society. Inspired by your theme, I just wish to briefly speak on 4 interconnected issues, which I believe are worth considering at a gathering of this nature. That's not prescribing to you. It's part of engagement in line with your engaged research. Firstly, I think we have at all times to ensure that we understand the epoch in which we find ourselves in. What's the world like in which we are engaging? Globally, we've seen the emergence of some of the most mind-blowing technological advances. But during the same period, we've also witnessed the most jarring wealth and income gap within and between nations. Along all of this also is the unfolding of what I touched on at the beginning, of something I never thought I would see in my life, of real-life genocide in Gaza that is being live-streamed on our lounges almost every night. The worst I have seen is a Gaza community carrying in their tradition a body on the shoulders of men, and a bomb had been planted inside that body, and it blew, killing those obviously who were carrying this and others who were nearby. Maybe the HSRC has to help us. What has happened to humanity? Well, others are arguing to say, actually, this has been part of what we've called Western civilization. That's how it has evolved. It has committed genocide against native people. So what we are seeing is its latest playing itself out. You can argue and debate about that. The United Nations 2025 World Social Report observes that, I quote, despite significant gains in poverty reduction, many people teeter on the brink of poverty, even as they move up the income ladder. Over 2.8 billion people, more than a third of the global population, live on between $2.15 to $6.85 a day, unquote. The report further observes that around 60% of people globally are concerned about losing their jobs and being unable to find new ones. It's one thing to face the prospect of losing a job, but it's worse when also there are no possibilities of finding a new one. At the same time, 65% of the world's population is living in countries where income inequality is growing. This is occurring at a time of major advances in the frontiers of scientific knowledge and new technological changes, promising rises in economic productivity, rising prosperity, and a world filled with abundance. That's what these scientific advances actually should be bringing about to humanity. One early scientist called Karl Marx did say this, by the way, that as means of production are modernized and with the advancement of technology, there will be no need for a full working day, there will be no need for a full working week, but we will be able to produce in abundance for everybody to be able, and increase the most important component of one's time, which is leisure. But we are getting these huge advances, but we are not getting what was hoped we'll be able to get. Even more instructive is the observation by this report, the UN report I'm talking about, that a large share of total income inequality can still be attributed to inequality based on characteristics such as race, caste, place of birth, and family background. In fact, one of the biggest challenges we have in the African continent is that our families are handing over poverty to the next generation of poverty. Now, this, of course, can be attributed to a number of factors, not least regarding the powerful intersection of the neoliberal global political economy and dominant science and technology systems prevalent in significant parts of the international system today. The effect of these systems, together with their ideological traditions, can also be discerned across many parts of science and technology systems in the global south itself. Humanity is also grappling with a complex set of other challenges, such as poor access to quality healthcare and education, armed conflicts, economic risks such as supply chain disruptions, and high debt levels and ecological crises like climate change and biodiversity loss. By the way, the numbers of deaths that we are seeing in Gaza are less than the number of deaths we are seeing in Sudan. We have another war there that is basically a genocide. But of course, we don't want to be told then that you can't talk about Palestine because this is happening in our continent, because that's not how human values operate. We must care about humanity wherever it is. The one person who put it very nicely was our own Nelson Mandela here in South Africa, who said, "Our own freedom as South Africans shall remain incomplete for as long as the Palestinian people are not free." There is the connection that our Madiba came up with. The challenges that I'm talking about are, of course, not unrelated to the dominant economic system on which economic growth has been based for many centuries. That is why sometimes, Ibo, I still have this reservation. When people talk about economic growth, I shrink a little bit. Yes, we do need economic growth, but economic growth does not translate into closing inequalities and even dealing with poverty. As a matter of interest, the highest level of growth in modern South Africa, which came into being in 1910, by the way, there was no South Africa before 1910, the single 10-year period of the highest level of growth was the 1960s. Till today, we haven't reached the level of growth in the 1960s. But what brought about that change? It was the Rivonia arrest. It was the complete banning of organizations. It was the intensification of oppression of the majority of the people in this country. That's what made that growth possible. And clearly the beneficiaries of that growth were not the majority of the people. So economic growth, without talking about the quality of and the nature of that growth, does not help. That's why in South Africa we then, after big debates, we then came up with this concept of inclusive growth, because we were realizing that not all growth is actually inclusive. Yes, we do need economic growth, but it must be inclusive growth. We also say, by the way, how of all these challenges that I'm outlining are compounded by the growing threat to multilateralism. I just read something, by the way, recently. I didn't know there was something called, I don't know how they describe this, but it's a clock which measures how close or far away are we from a nuclear holocaust. It's developed by scientists. They say we are actually the closest that in any other time to a nuclear holocaust. We are having more countries now having nuclear weapons, and we've got wars that involve people who have nuclear weapons, countries that have got nuclear weapons. You just need one mad person to do. Eh? Yes, I agree. We have one. That's why the clock has moved so close. Anyway, threatening multilateralism through bullying, as we are seeing what is happening now. Now, I'm saying this because I'm not talking politics. They'll say, yeah. Now the minister is just talking politics. What I'm talking about is real. Well, we may differ in terms of nuance or emphasis, but it's real. That's the world that we are facing with huge challenges. The point I'm making, all these, some of them are complicating as we are actually advancing in scientific knowledge and technology. The second issue then I wish to reflect on is the importance of harnessing the potential of the global south as part of our response to the prevailing global reality. I think this is important because sometimes we've got so many problems in the south that we write ourselves off. We don't even see sometimes the potential we have, or even identify some progress that here and there we are actually making. In addition to being home to the majority of the world's population, what we call the global south, in the last 50 years or so, the global south has played a significant role in shaping parts of the global economic and geopolitical landscape in a positive way. We've shaped it in a negative way because the world we have today is as a result of the fact that at some stage we had slavery. At some stage we had a colonized continent, with the exception of Ethiopia. So we made a contribution by being oppressed. But there are also positive contributions that are coming from the global south. A report, for instance, titled Global South Development Achievements and Challenges by the Global South Development Center observes this, and let me quote, the global south accounts for 85% of the world's population, around 40% of the global economy, 46% of global goods exports, 57% of global foreign direct investment inflows. They flow into the global south, 57%. 45% of global manufacturing output, and approximately half of intermediate goods exports. The global south is also actively engaged in addressing global challenges. That was a quote which I messed up a little bit by adding a few comments. The report further observes that many emerging economies have increased their investment in research and development. That's interesting. Resulting in continuous enhancement of innovation capabilities. Historic achievements have been made in poverty reduction, with over 1 billion people in the global south lifted out of extreme poverty in recent decades. Significant progress has been made in health. Access to education has been increasingly expanding. For example, higher education enrollment rate increased from 13% to 38% over the last few decades. Despite these positive advances, we still face many forms of uneven development and rising levels of social inequality within nations of the global south. And much remains to be done to transform its structural causes. Science, technology, and innovation, including research, can play an important transformative role in enabling new pathways and new opportunities for social mobility and inclusive development, focusing especially on historically marginalized sections of society. So what am I saying thus far? HSRC does its work together with the NRF in a particular global context and also in the South, which has got some of these features, negative but also positive ones, that we need to be building on. Let me come to our continent briefly, which is the third issue I wish to reflect on, is also the importance of South Africa's scientific community understanding of Africa's developmental challenges and context. We are part of the African continent. Under apartheid, we were thought to be a little piece of Europe in the African continent. We are part of the African continent. It's very important that we emphasize this thing all the time. Now, that's why it's important to understand then our own context in this continent of ours. And also look into the factors that will enable Africa to achieve higher levels of inclusive development. As you may well be aware, the impact of the legacy of colonialism in the form of structural inequality, poverty, and unemployment, and new challenges such as climate change, continue to impede Africa's ability to achieve higher levels of development and engage with the rest of the world on an equal footing. One of the contributing factors is the state or quality of our research infrastructure on our continent. To strengthen Africa's capacity to engage meaningfully with the rest of the world, one of the things we need to do is to significantly expand Africa's research infrastructure, particularly public research capabilities over the next decade. If Pan-African research infrastructures can be connected more widely, smartly, and differently, or much more efficiently, let's put it that way, this will make collaboration among Africa's scientists and researchers much more seamless and support the development of solid ideas on how we make better use of our vast natural research endowment. And one of our endowments, which is a significant demographic in our continent, is that we are a youthful continent. If we can empower youth from the African continent, that will change the world. They become innovators. They become all the things that are necessary for development. It would not only benefit our continent, it will benefit the rest of the world, because there's a huge population of young people that we are actually talking about. It's therefore vital that we make these connections and networks to function on a Pan-African scale. All of this is critical for the ability of our scientists and researchers to enable the implementation and sustainability of the African Union's Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa, which we call STISA 2034, the African Continental Free Trade Area, with the view of achieving the objectives of the AU's Agenda 2063. Now, related to this then is the need for a sovereign research agenda for Africa. Then the question is, NRF HSRC, how much are you contributing to the development of a sovereign research agenda for Africa? I'll explain this, it will become clearer as I just talk to this, which is the fourth and final issue, by the way, I wish to reflect on. A 2025 journal article titled Status of African Research and Its Contribution to Global Health Research, a review and an opinion, observes that, and I quote it, although Africa accounts for 14% of the world's population, it produces very little published research, with less than 1% of global research output credited to African scholars. As we place research at the center of Africa's development, we should also concern ourselves with a number of other critical questions. Questions such as, who determines the focus areas for the research that is conducted by a public science institution in Africa? But it doesn't only apply to the rest of the continent. We here in South Africa, we must also ask that question, given our own history. To what extent have we deracialized research questions that are being asked by our public research institutions? To what extent have we engendered and gone to eliminate the patriarchal nature of many research questions in our own country and indeed in our continent? The other question is, who funds the research that is conducted by our public institutions in Africa, and what is the agenda of those funders? Apart from the persistence of the coloniality of knowledge, Africa's research agenda continues, unfortunately, to be donor dependent. And so the donors will ask research questions that in the end benefits them and less the continent. These may sound like very difficult questions, but they are necessary to be asked. Not only to be asked, to be answered. This dependence that I'm talking about continues to present us with such problems such as misalignments between our primary research questions and local needs. And also those projects tend to be short-term in nature. And this huge other challenge we have, which is the loss of intellectual property from the continent. And the phenomenon which we call the brain drain, by the way. If there's one thing that should serve as a major mobilizing factor for the development of a sovereign research agenda for Africa, it is our tragic experience at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're the worst affected and we're the last in the queue to get vaccines. During this period, we found ourselves in a situation where the lives of millions of people on the African continent were dependent on vaccines and therapeutics from other parts of the world. We should never find ourselves in this precarious situation again, and one of the ways of avoiding this is by developing a sovereign research agenda. Part of a sovereign research agenda for the African continent is that it must at the center place pandemic preparedness, amongst other things. We're still going to have some more pandemics. We should be prepared better. That is very important. Because some countries thought that they will, by the way, defeat COVID by giving their citizens, some of the developed countries, and not bother about the rest of the world. Now, I get reminded of a story of a friend of mine from the US who said, yeah, we here in the United States think that if we just provide vaccines, now there's even mad ideas from that country, by the way, about vaccines. Really mad ideas. Then we're okay. So this friend of mine, it's like number of people are in a big swimming pool, they are swimming. You know? Then it's announced that those who want to go and have a pee can go into that corner of the swimming pool. hoping that the rest of the people in the swimming pool are then not going to be affected. They're going to remain clear. The world is so interdependent and integrated today. You can't have a pandemic unchecked in one part of the world and hope that it won't reach other parts of the world. That should inform our science. Now, in conclusion, we are living through a time that is characterized by unprecedented geopolitical and economic shifts, but also a time that presents us with a number of unique development opportunities, as evidenced in the potential of transformative technologies, such as AI. By the way, we must never forget also, technology is not neutral. Part of the effectiveness, I hate to use that word, of the genocide in Gaza is because the Israelis are using artificial intelligence. And there is also a lot of scientific experimentation happening in Gaza with people's lives. That is happening there. So what we see then is we must make sure, that's why your emphasis of science for justice is so important. Now, these opportunities of science must be consciously and deliberately harnessed and directed to tackle the major developmental and transformational challenges faced by the majority of our citizens. In the midst of all of this, as a country and continent, we must develop well-thought-out ideas of how we wish to position ourselves and help to shape transitions within the global geopolitical economy. We mustn't just see ourselves as recipients of ideas and knowledge from other continents. We also must contribute to new knowledge. And we are capable of doing so in many respects. We need to consciously empower ourselves to be able to do so. We therefore take the view that we understand, to be engaged research must not just be concerned with shaping critical public policy and stimulating innovation and meaningful socio-economic transformation. It's got to go beyond that. I think Professor Nelwa Mondo, you articulated some of those things very well in your input. I won't repeat them. Engaged research must also concern itself with designing a new set of human and social relations, whose ultimate goal is the realization of a more just and humane world. Your conference has a vast and multidisciplinary scope of discussion themes, and I am hopeful that you will help us to produce further important insights into how engaged research can be used to construct a shared and sustainable future. I'm glad the two entities are working together at this, led by the HSRC in this instance. Thank you to the HSRC because you continue to act as part of our society and not as observers of the society, but as an integral part. Though we don't like some of the things you are saying. Why on earth do you predict that the ANC is going to get less than 40%? And you expect some of us to behave and say, HSRC is so scientific. We stop being scientific. I hope the Chief Electoral Officer is not listening. We stop being scientific at that point and say, Nitata planteni short. Now, Professor Muswetsa, I don't want them to say I'm then wanting to further abuse you. Congratulations for producing that research and that book, by the way. Yes, the president must see it. You know? It's very important, as well as my colleagues in cabinet. Now, I don't want you then to say, I'm giving you thank you for well done, but I'm giving you more work. I must end up by saying this. I vowed that when I get the next opportunity, I'm going to talk, and HSRC must help us to understand this with the view of dealing with this. The growing pandemic of gambling in our country. Online gambling I know, it's because of the conditions in which our people are. So they are hoping that you're going to win a lotto. You know? Also, some kinds of, I'm glad also even in terms of religious practices, something is being done now. But this thing of gambling, just the figures, total amount of money spent on gambling in South Africa is 1.5 trillion rands, which is 75% of the government's total budget. And recent research, I don't know, you didn't do that one, that about half of some little disposable income that our people have goes to gambling. And this week I saw that NSFAS students also are increasingly gambling. With the money we give them as government to educate themselves. And online gambling has grown enormously, and we are not taxing it. As government. We are not taxing it. Has grown in leaps and bounds. You sit now in front of your smartphone and gamble your money away. We know, but the HSRC has to tell us more. Now you will say, yeah, I knew, Minister, you're going to leave something with me. But who else should I cry to if not the HSRC? I wish you a productive conference and look forward to the outcomes of your deliberations. I mean that seriously, because we have to listen to what comes out of the work that you do. Even where we might disagree in some instances, but we have to engage with it. We don't only need engaged research, you also need engaged politics. Because disengaged politics is dictatorship. Because it stands out there and tells everyone what to do. I'm sorry if I've taken a bit longer. By the way, we started a bit late, blame me, but also the CEO, because when I was here before 10, he then decides to take me to where the books are. Now, when I get into a place where there are books, I'm like a little child who sees toys, who enters a toy shop. So we are sorry about that, but I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.